Hello, Art Eisen here once again, and welcome to my one-all of DoDonPachi Resurrection 1.5. I had initially uploaded this run without commentary. However, it occurred to me that this is perhaps the most played DoDonPachi game and one of the most played shmups currently. For that reason, I thought it would be valuable to record commentary to use as a resource in learning the game. So let's start by talking about ship selection. There's no reason not to pick strong style unless you're trying to challenge yourself or go for really high scores. For survival, it is strictly better than the other two types. You get the auto bombs of bomb style and the powered up shot and laser of power style. Of note is that auto bomb cannot be turned off in Resurrection 1.5, only in Black Label. The most popular ship seems to be Type B because it has nearly full screen coverage similar to Type C. Many have argued that that makes Type C redundant. I disagree. Type B only has full screen coverage if you're in the center of the screen. C is more than capable of picking off popcorn enemies from the horizontal extremes of the play area, which is very useful when misdirecting bullets. It also has the slowest movement speed in the game. This makes the micro-dodging found throughout the game easier for me. In every DoDonPachi game featuring a Type C ship, I tend to gravitate towards it because I value screen coverage more than movement speed. However, I would encourage you to try the different ships and see which one is most comfortable for you, and the one that is most fun for you, because in case this does end up being difficult for you, you may as well make it fun. So let's talk about hypers. This entire game lives and dies by the hyper system. The horizontal off-white gauge above my hit counter and ship stock shows how close I am to having a hyper available. Hypers cancel all bullets on the screen and power up both of your weapons. They also increase the rate at which your hit count accumulates. However, your hit count is unlikely to matter for survival. I'll explain more about why that is in a moment. Another benefit of hyper is that your shot becomes able to cancel enemy bullets. There are many instances when you can activate a hyper, hold rapid fire, and be functionally invincible. On the other hand, the game has several mechanics in place to counteract this, which I will discuss as they arise. The first such mechanic is that these purple arrow-like lasers are not erased by the shot while in hyper. To defend yourself from them, you must use your own laser, which initiates a cool Dragon Ball Z-type beam of war between the two of you. Naturally, this also reduces your screen coverage. There are many sections of the game that take advantage of the fact that you cannot block lasers while using the shot to cover more of the screen. An additional benefit of hyper is the short invincibility time upon activating it. This is independent of the bullet cancelling that hypers also provide. Hypers, on activation, make you fully intangible for about 2 seconds. For that duration, you can ignore not only the hitboxes of bullets, but of enemies themselves. Because one of the ways to build hyper more quickly is to deal damage with the laser aura, or in other words, to simply point-blank stuff. This is fairly exploitable in a number of circumstances. While if you're playing for survival, it can be beneficial to keep your hyper rank low, you can use this invincibility to trivialize the final boss of the first loop. So you may have noticed that my hit count just turned red and disappeared. You may also have noticed that at other times in this run, it has turned purple and counted down rather than resetting entirely. This is dependent on whether or not you have a hyper stocked. If you have a hyper ready, emptying the chain gauge will reset your hit count completely. Now, I would encourage you to ignore this mechanic if you're just playing for survival, and there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that unlike every other DoDonPachi game, getting both score extends is not just a matter of survival. Rather than the usual 2 to 3.5 times, the requirement for the second score extend is 10 times the first one. The other reason is that being hit will force you to auto-bomb, which will reset your hit count. Since not only does this game feature the get point system based on hit count from previous games, it has a score multiplier based on ranges of hit count that is only active when you are not in hyper but have one ready to deploy. What all this means for you, the player, is that in order to get the second score extend, you have to play well enough that you don't actually need it. Now, if you want to play this game long-term, go for a 2-all, compete with top scores, etc., etc., you're going to have to do that anyway, so you may as well. But if you just want to pop in, get the 1-all, and leave, I would recommend assuming that you have 5 lives to work with rather than 6. Unless, of course, you absolutely can't make it through the laser sequence or some other part of Stage 5 without 6 more bombs. However, I did not get the second score extend in my run, nor do I have scoring routes particularly worth demonstrating. For this reason, getting the second score extend is outside the scope of this commentary. Now that I've covered hypers, I would like to take a moment to talk about how much I hate this next pattern. It's like a mix of Mushihime-sama Boss 3 and Mid-Boss 4 with a bunch of extra crap thrown in the middle, yay! No idea how I successfully avoided it. That's like the only boss pattern in the entire game I consistently have trouble with just because of the bullet speed. Oh, I should probably talk about the bees at some point, huh? Unlike the first DoDonPachi, the hidden bee icons in this game have a purpose beyond scoring. If you pick them up while they are green or while they are changing colors, you will have a portion of your hypermeter filled. This is not actually crucial for clearing. There are 2 bees in the game that I would consider particularly valuable, and I will point them out upon reaching them. I only successfully acquired one anyway. If you'd like to see maps of all the hidden bee locations, maps can be found on shmups.wiki. I'll post a link in the description. So now at the beginning of Stage 3, the game has become complex enough that it bears mentioning specific strategies. For these green ships that flood the screen with blue needles, I slowly tap dodge from one side of the screen to the other, allowing Type C's superior screen coverage to pick them off from all angles. I'm definitely not biased about my ship selection at all. So right about here I get hit, and I'm still kind of annoyed about it because I wasn't paying very much attention. And honestly, I probably should have hypered immediately, but there you go, I guess. It's doubly unfortunate because if I'd killed that giant ship, it would have cancelled all the bullets on the screen anyway, because that's how those guys work. But thankfully I don't need much in the way of resources for the end of the game, aside from the laser sequence. And if you've played this game, you know what laser sequence I'm talking about. I would say you'll probably want 2 full lives to be expended on that, unless you want to spend a whole lot of time routing it, which again is harder than actually clearing this mode, assuming that you don't route it at all. Anyway, the strategy in this stage is pretty simple. Just focus on the big enemies, they tend to cancel bullets when they die. If you're lasering them, they'll usually die just before they're about to become a problem. And right here, you're going to want to have your laser ready unless you feel like getting slapped by that laser coming out of the wall there. I will say, contrary to what you might expect, those laser emitters do have hitboxes. You can run into them and it will kill you even if you're using the laser. Or rather, it'll auto-bomb because this game is fairly merciful until it isn't. So we're coming up on the mid-boss here, and my strategy for him is to just hyper and not let him play the video game. You don't need to time it any particular way, just do it whenever you think you're about to get hit, and then just hold shot and melt him, and that'll make him really, really easy, as you can see. You may have noticed, observant viewer of mine, that whenever I use a hyper, a number appears over my ship. This is the hyper rank. This is the other mechanic intended to prevent use of hyper exploits. Hyper rank will be a number from 1 to 5 and it will go up every time you use a hyper, and it resets at the end of every stage in the first loop. It affects exactly 2 things in the first loop of the game. The first is your shot's ability to erase enemy bullets while in hyper. At 5, some of them will be almost impossible to erase. The second is that at higher hyper ranks, erased bullets may turn into lasers. You can tell which lasers are a result of this mechanic by the danger icon that appears over them. Outside of completing a stage, nothing reduces the hyper rank in the first loop except for dying, which reduces it by 1. This makes it dangerous to spam hypers, even if you're capable of getting enough hypers to do that. This cylindrical laser here is the source of the game's hidden extend. You'll always get it by destroying the laser unless it is destroyed by the damage from a bomb or auto-bomb. What this means is that if you get hit, as long as the auto-bomb isn't what destroys the cannon, you can still get the extend. We've now reached the 3rd boss, Perfect, who I made much harder than I needed to by playing like a fool. The first pattern is a fairly simplistic lanes pattern that should never hit you like it just hit me. Unfortunately, knowing what I know about charging hypers, as well as my fondness for all things point-blanking, often causes me to put myself in less than ideal situations, as you can see right there when I tried to point-blank the boss, and she face-planted into me. How utterly magnificent. However, if nothing else, this is a testament to the fact that you can play foolishly and still clear the game. Resurrection 1.5 is quite merciful. At the beginning of that attack, you can safely point-blank for a brief period, and you may as well, because it's not really that hard to get into position even with the slowest chip in the game afterwards, in order to dodge what ends up being the last pattern of that phase. The first attack of her final phase is dodged easily enough by tapping left and right. However, for the attack that immediately succeeds it, you are probably going to want to have a hyper stocked. This is why I was so overzealous with point-blanking in the early parts of the fight. Not that I needed to be. It may be that there is in fact a consistent path through this, and in fact I'm almost certain there is, but I really don't see why you should torture yourself with trying to find one, when instead you could just press button 4 and hold rapid, and pretend the boss isn't there for a moment. It occurs to me that I forgot to mention that the partial ring around your ship shows the remaining hyper duration. You probably already know this, but you can carry hypers between stages. I mostly mention that to segue into something else that I forgot to mention. That geometric crystalline barrier around your ship shows when you are invincible. It occurs to me that, given this knowledge, there are probably much more optimal boss strategies that I could have used, ones that would trivialize them to an even further extent. But I suppose I'll worry about that when I come back for Black Label, which of course I have to do because it's a DoDonPachi game. These giant rotating lasers do not do all that much to telegraph their appearance, but you will want to use laser immediately as you notice them, and immediately make them your top priority. These copies of the DoDonPachi Stage 1 mid-boss are best handled by positioning yourself down one of the lanes of blue bullets and tap dodging left or right, whichever direction the blue bullets are traveling. For those sequences of ships, you'll just want to misdirect their bullets from the left side of the screen to the right or vice versa. Fun fact, the DoDonPachi Stage 1 mid-boss copies use the same bullet pattern that mid-boss uses in DoDonPachi campaign version. The rarest shmup to ever be produced by Cave. Well, okay, it might not be exactly the same, but it's very close, and considering that it's the same enemy, I'm pretty sure that was intentional. Then again, now that I think about it, it might actually just be the Loop 2 pattern from the normal version of that same game. But I've seen almost no second loop gameplay from it, so I guess I wouldn't know. Someday, my friends, someday. This mid-boss isn't too tough, but if he gives you trouble, I recommend hypering him early in the fight to pile up damage quickly. The last pattern you see him use in my run is the hardest one, and if he dies before he gets to use it, that's good for you. And there isn't anything particularly super threatening immediately after. There's some lasers, but they can just be misdirected because they can't change direction after they've already fired. Which, incidentally, is similar to the ones in Stage 2, and I probably would have brought that up then if I weren't explaining the hyper system. It's kind of hard to explain everything in a timely manner in a game that's very dense. Not much can be done about that, I suppose. Unless I were willing to, like, pause the game and talk about it, but that would require me knowing in advance where I would need to do that, and some people also don't like it when you pause runs of arcade games. Although, I guess too bad, because I had to pause this for like 15 seconds later because I was getting a call. So as you can see, those red rotating laser batteries are pretty frickin' dangerous and a high priority threat whenever they show up, seeing as destroying them also cancels all bullets on the screen on Twitter. Or I guess X? It's called X now? I don't use Twitter, I don't know. Looking back on the run as I record this commentary, this is actually horrible. I played terribly almost the entire time. So you should take that as encouragement that if you're playing like garbage, you can probably still clear. I have essentially no route for anything other than certain specific parts of Stage 5, which I cobbled together through the 4 or 5 attempts this took. This last volley here is probably the hardest part of the stage. You'll need to misdirect the blue bullets while sliding between the pink bullets, all while having the reduced speed of laser since you don't want to get shot by the laser batteries. Then it's just one more DEP1 mid-boss clone, a couple of small guys, and then a couple more laser batteries. I have nothing to say for the next 30 seconds or so. The fourth boss of the game is deceptively easy because she facilitates you point-blanking her throughout large sections of the fight. At the beginning, you'll want to destroy the side rockets first, as they shoot far more bullets than the central ones. The boss's first proper pattern can be dodged just by tap-dodging to the left or right. Try not to get trapped behind a wall of bullets like I did, but if you do, just hyper. It's not really that hard to get another one in this fight. So her little gazebo thing will come down to the bottom of the screen and you can point blank it pretty freely. Just make sure to watch for the boss herself as she moves up the screen. And if you think you're gonna get hit, use a manual bomb instead of relying on auto bomb because it does significantly more damage. You can tell when I used a manual bomb in my run because the animation is much longer and the particles spiral outwards after spiraling inwards. As stated previously, I did not play very well this run, but I still cleared. So, don't get disheartened if you're playing like garbage. I went into the final stage with 2 bombs and 2 lives. That is definitely on the low end of what you should reasonably accept. The final boss can be completely trivialized with only 4 bombs. Well, assuming you can reach her with a hyper in stock, but you probably can, because the game gives you a bunch of enemies specifically to build one up as you're about to reach her. So we have about 2 minutes of gameplay before the funny lasers, and I'm going to take this time to complain about all the things that make this my 4th favorite DoDonPachi game. Firstly, strong style was a mistake. Why would you put a ship in the game that is objectively better in almost every respect than every other ship with no downsides? Compare this to the ship selection in Diojo, where you get to choose whether you want more power loss on death or fewer bombs, meaning that your mistake allowance is lower, but you're punished less severely for each of them. Secondly, the funny laser section feels like a resource check for the sake of justifying the auto-bomb system. Why not just not have the auto-bomb system and not have the funny laser wheels? Honestly, it seems like a game design band-aid, regardless of which one came first and was made to address the other. Ironically, a game that lacked both of these things would probably be significantly more challenging, because you would have to play a whole lot better up to this point. You may notice that in the first 3 stages, I used a total of 10 bombs. That's absurd. Now, I do want to be fair to this game. I clearly don't hate it because I went to the trouble of beating it, and I do have a decent number of positive things to say about it as well. I think that ship movement is the second smoothest it's been in the series, with the smoothest being DOJ Black Label. This feels pretty comparable to White Label on the whole. While I don't like the hyper system as much as DOJ or SDOJ, I do appreciate the presence of resource routing beyond simply bombs, especially since auto-bombing removes that from consideration. Okay, maybe I don't have that many positive things to say about the game, because everything I just said that was good was a backhanded compliment, and pointing out how another game did it better. Damn it, Cave. Port DDP and SDOJ already. It would seem, though, that Cave learned their lesson with Strong Style with Black Label, seeing as it drastically increases the difficulty of all the enemy bullet patterns. Honestly, I should probably play Black Label. I think I'd like it a lot more than 1.5. And to be fair, that is something I intend to do, although right now I'm working on Futari 1.5 with Abnormal Reco, which is a trip, I gotta tell ya. Alright, we're just about at the laser wheels. For the first sequence, you're gonna want 2 bombs and a hyper. I screw up the second bomb and end up auto-bombing instead, but it's fine, that still works, you can be slow. So once you're inside the first ring, you're going to want to pull all the bullets as far to the bottom left as possible, and then use a manual bomb to get outside of both rings. Make sure you're holding laser when your invincibility runs out. Now, it might seem like there's an opportunity to go up into that upper ring between the gaps and the laser emitters, but that's a trap, it closes, and you'll have to bomb or hyper out anyway. Also, don't auto-bomb, make sure you manual bomb, because the iframes last a whole lot longer. If I'd timed my bomb correctly, I might have been able to conserve my hyper here. We're going to run into some more funny laser wheels in just a second. Also, I can't tell if destroying that building is what canceled those bullets or the fact that I'm in hyper. Pretty sure it's the first one, though. So again, you're going to want to kite all the bullets to the bottom left and last as long as possible, and then bomb at the last possible moment. Granted, if you're more preemptive than I was, or in a faster ship than I'm using, you could probably slip past that last wall of blue bullets without needing to bomb. Anyway, you're going to have to play around with your position in this next part, and be a little bit wary of the bottom left, as you can see another set of laser emitters shows up there. And then again on the bottom right. Knowing these are here in advance can save you 2 or even 3 bombs. So far, we're sitting at 2 mandatory bombs and 1 kinda sus one. Ideally, the final laser sequence will take you only 2 more bombs, or 1 bomb and 1 hyper. For as much as I complained about it and talked about how unnecessary of a difficulty spike it was, 4 bombs is really not that big of a deal, and if you play better than I did up to this point, which is not exactly a tall order, you should have more than enough. Oh hey, look, there's some of those danger lasers I was talking about earlier. Be careful on the bottom right here, by the way, there's going to be another laser wheel. This game is kind of weird with the memo that it incorporates. Other than the original DoDonPachi, there's very little in this franchise that requires you to memorize where enemies are going to come from when approaching the game from a purely survival angle. Also, that B right there is the one B in the game that you'll probably want to make sure you get. If you already have a full hyper gauge, I wouldn't worry about it, but it can be helpful to have a hyper either to get past this last set of laser emitters, or to deal with the second mid-boss right after. Also, if you weren't aware, I am a fool. I don't know why I was using laser here instead of shot. I could have just erased all of his bullets, and this would have been completely free, but instead I had to throw away a life and a bomb. Actually, 2 bombs. But if nothing else, I suppose it demonstrates how achievable this clear is. I think this game is a very serviceable first arcade clear. This game is easy to access on both Steam and on Switch. In spite of the intimidating bullet counts, the auto-bomb system and hypers make the game fairly forgiving for newer players, or people like me who just didn't want to put in very much effort. I cannot emphasize enough, you can make a ton of mistakes and still clear the game. I'm sure this game has great scoring potential as well, but that's not really something I'm super interested in doing at this point. If I'm going to play for score, it's probably going to be in Bat Rider or DoDonPachi. But I think the best audience for Resurrection 1.5 survival play is going to be people looking for their first arcade clear. Also, I didn't get hit there. That's not canon, that's just someone else's DoDonPachi fanfiction. And as it turns out, it was in fact destroying those buildings that cancels all bullets on screen, which I was questioning earlier. So, coming up in a second here, I actually had to pause the game for about 10 to 15 seconds. It's kind of cringe. I'm not a big fan of pausing in arcade games because that's not supposed to be a capability that they have. Unfortunately, I got a call and I had to check and see who it was, but seeing as I was already in hyper and holding down shot, I don't think it actually gave me any advantage to pause there, so I don't feel too bad about it at the end of the day. I mean, it didn't help me time anything. I was already functionally invincible. It's not until hyper rank 5 that the bullet canceling starts to get really sus, and that was a rank 4 hyper. Anyway, this is the last laser section in the game, but thankfully these ones are not rotating, so hopefully you won't need any bombs here. It might actually be possible to destroy these laser cannons before you reach them with a wider angle shot, like the ones found on Type B and Type C, which I'm using, but I didn't think about it, so there you go, I suppose. This would have been a reasonable spot for a bomb if I'd had more of them from playing better earlier in the game, and wouldn't you know it, I ended up using one anyway, so I guess that's just as well. 4 bombs is a bit sus for this point, but all is not lost. There's only one more major obstacle in the game, and it's this giant frickin' cannon thing, which might possibly be the same one from Stage 4 of DOJ. I'm not sure, they all kind of look the same to me. It uses similar patterns, but it doesn't eject the giant cartridges, which you then have to destroy. Once again, I probably should have just used shot and not tried to laser, but thankfully I was able to point blank the big cannon and explode it before I could fire another volley, so everything turned out more or less okay. Losing a bomb is cringe, but I can beat the final boss with only 4 of them. I know it's actually possible to do with fewer, but 4 is pretty safe. And thankfully, with the amount of enemies that they give you here, it is almost impossible to not have a hyper prepared for this boss. Now, Shooty is actually quite difficult if you fight her normally, but I don't know why you would given the strategy I'm about to show. First off, you point blank her wing on either the left or right side for 3 waves of bullets. Then hyper, using the invincibility to sit on top of her for the 2 seconds that allows. Bomb, then when the bomb iframes are about to run out, hyper again. You'll likely have already charged one up from your point blanking. Then use another bomb when the iframes from the second hyper are about to expire. This should clear her first phase. Sit below her until she does something actually threatening, then move in for another point-blanked hyper. You might be noticing a pattern here. I haven't experimented with this kind of strategy on other bosses, but this one is completely trivialized by this approach, except for this one attack depending on how your timing of bombs and hypers is. I'm sure it's probably doable with fewer bombs as well. I know I definitely didn't need 2 bombs in the first phase, I bombed pretty early. But yeah, that's DoDonPachi Resurrection 1.5 with C Strong. I'm definitely gonna come back for Black Label, who knows if I'll come back to this mode and try and get a cleaner clear with a better score, etc, etc. All that said, this has been Art Eisen. Hope you enjoyed watching, like and subscribe for more content like this, etc, etc, and don't die.
Mission complete. 作戦終了です。ゲームオーバー。